The next section will be visitor statements. I did read the long several paragraphs earlier in the meeting. At the regular meeting, we do have 2 opportunities for visitors. And this will be one. We have Mr. Sam Levin to speak on modernization of high school facilities. Sam, would you like to step up? And then would you like me to read all those paragraphs again about the visitors' comments?
No.
Okay.
But I believe I have permission to speak more than 3 minutes.
Right, I think my notes say you have about 15 minutes. Is that going to be enough for you?
I think that'll be good enough.
Okay.
You might want to throw me out of here before then, but I think.
Can you just tell us your name for those watching?
Sam Levin, L-E-V-I-N.
And generally, where do you live in relationship
I
to
live
the
in
high school?
Hollywood, on Parkview,
On
not far from here.
Okay, on Parkview?
Parkview.
Okay.
All right.
We have time?
All right. First of all, I want to thank the board for granting my request for additional time to present my comments on the modernization of the athletic facilities and related matters. In light of School District 96 plan to limit time for public comment at its board meetings, this board should be commended for not immediately jumping on the bandwagon to suppress free speech. That being said, congratulations to the board on its decision to sue the Village of Brookfield for interfering with the modernization of the high school. How dare the village to tell the high school what it can and cannot do with its property. The board has invested a lot of resources, most important, the board's reputation, to construct a 91-space parking lot and erect a 10-foot fence for the viewing pleasure of the students at Hollywood Elementary School. If the board wants to tear up the tennis courts, build them anew in the same location, and after the board is victorious in court, rip out the new tennis courts to build the parking lot and rebuild the tennis courts next to Hollywood Elementary School, who am I to question the board's judgment? I have heard from a few know-it-alls that when someone has a building project, he or she will get their ducks in a row by securing the required building permit with proper zoning after the finalization of the plans and before commencing construction. Those know-it-alls tell me it's customarily done this way to avoid unnecessary expenditures and to make sure the project goes forward according to the plans. It defies logic to do otherwise and avoids wasting money. However, this board, daring to be different and going against the grain for reasons far beyond my comprehension, acts first and asks for permission later. There are those naysayers who believe dispensing the community's money with such largesse makes the board fiscally impotent. That's not true. The board is very effective at spending the taxpayers' money. In fact, this board will never garner the reputation that it throws money around like manhole covers. For example, the board decided that an additional $214,000 spent on a new stone base for the football field is a good investment. A better investment, I hope, than the previous field installed 10 years ago. In any event, looking at the athletic facility on steroids across the street, $214,000 is a mere drop in the taxpayer's bucket. Keynesian economics advocates would be proud of the board's decision to spend $1.3 million for underground stormwater storage improvements. Presumably, the expenditure comes with a money-back guarantee, or, at the very least, the board's promise to show up with their buckets when the water starts flowing in the surrounding homeowners' basements. Notwithstanding the futility of taming the forces of nature, some folks are comforted by the board's tax and spend policies, whether that money is spent on education or is here spent on an athletic facility to keep up with and, quite frankly, surpass the Yorks, the New Triers, the Hinsdale Centrals, the Lincoln Ways, and the Wheaton Centrals. Personally, with Riverside Brookfield's ATC scores a mere 2 points above the state average, perhaps the money would have been better spent on the school's core curriculum and fine arts programs. Let's be honest, investing our money in English, math, science, and music is likely to pay higher dividends in developing in our children the skills that are necessary to compete in today's global economy than pouring millions of dollars into an athletic facility that could have and should have been built for half the cost. What we have here is a glaring example of the death of common sense. Rumor has it football programs throughout the state may be folding due to the predicted avalanche of lawsuits against school districts and the IHSA for football-related injuries. Based on this board's sound judgment in the past, I am confident that when Arby's football program is eliminated, the school will rebuild its music department and use the multi-million-dollar football field to host a Battle of the Bands competition. Think of the pride that a Battle of the Bands competition would instill in our community and the solid brain matter it would instill in our students rather than the deteriorated brain matter caused by football. Skeptics are convinced the board's fiscal irresponsibility is surpassed only by its lack of self-restraint. In fact, the board showed uncanny self-restraint when it refused to spend $110,000 on a Nike Grind turf as an alternative to the carcinogenic crumb rubber surface preferred by the board. We are fortunate to have a physician on the board and apparently a medically trained superintendent stating in the Landmark for the world to read that our children are safe from Hodgkin's lymphoma despite a gridiron laden with toxic materials. Recently, the president of the board brushed off health concerns raised by crumb rubber opponents, stating, "The cost and time of procurement for alternative turfs were not feasible for the project's schedule and budget." Isn't it comforting to know that the high school's schedules and budgets are more important than the health, welfare, and safety of our children? I submit to this board that it should be more concerned about the health, welfare, and safety of our children, and less concerned with schedules and budgets. Unfortunately for our children, the board does not agree with me. Well, in my humble opinion, the board's priorities are all screwed up. Undeterred by conflicting studies, our good doctor on the board, our sagacious board president, and our apparently medical board certified superintendent show no self-restraint in brushing off the health risks posed to our children from an athletic field composed of toxic substances. In fact, they assure us there are no health risks and that our kids are in a safe place with the crumb rubber. Understandably, if the board exercised self-restraint and erred on the side of caution by protecting our most precious resource, our children, then our community would not be able to see our kids, and for that matter, a semi-pro football team from Indiana, participate risk-free on a synthetic petrochemical carcinogen field worthy of being named after a former mayor of Chicago. I also want to thank the board for the blurb on the high school's website that promotes the board's lawsuit against the village and explains the board's solution to the Hollywood menace. Particularly impressive is the blurb's disclosure that District 96 and Hollywood residents were the ones who requested the high school to move the tennis courts to provide greater separation of the parking lot from Hollywood School. First and foremost, many of the residents of Hollywood oppose the parking lot, plain and simple. However, if the obnoxious 91-space parking lot is built next to our elementary school, then at the very least, there should be a buffer between the classrooms and the parking lot. Without the board's spin, people would think the high school did nothing to accommodate the wishes of the Hollywood residents living in the shadows of modernization. In fact, the board has been very accommodating to architects, contractors, and just about everyone except the residents of Hollywood. The board allowed the contractor to remove the grove of trees on the south end and southeast side of the football field to accommodate the high school's construction, or more accurately, the high school's plan of destruction? Does the board have any clue how many trees have been removed from our community in recent years? The zoo removed nearly 200 trees to build its bison attraction. The village of Brookfield removed at least 30 trees to construct a parking space north of the football field. Currently, Brookfield and Riverside are removing hundreds of trees decimated by the emerald ash borer disease. And recently, the high school removed the grove of trees to erect its gargantuan, juiced up, second to no one athletic facility. Clearly, the board does not care about our ecosystem and how we depend on trees as a source of oxygen for our existence. This board is too egocentric and too self-absorbed to recognize its decisions for what they are, foolish and myopic. The board also accommodated the Village and Planning Commission when well-paid consultants prepared fancy sketches of the proposed project to sway the decision makers to vote for Tomorrowland. The artist's rendition of the project reminded me of the Jetsons. Like the Jetsons, we'll probably need to wear helmets to make up for the loss of oxygen caused by the destruction of the trees. Like the Jetsons, the board's traffic consultants concluded the parking lot would not increase traffic congestion because the additional vehicles would be flown and not driven to school. Anyone who thinks that an obnoxious 91-space parking lot won't increase traffic congestion is either brain dead or willing to say anything for the almighty dollar. It is fitting and proper that the board, under the leadership of President Michael Welch, has raised the bar in protecting Hollywood's children from hormone-energized teenagers driving their parents' automobiles to and from the high school. The same teenagers who, in the morning, express through their driving their disdain for attending high school, and the same teenagers who, after school, express through their driving their thrill to get the heck out of Dodge in their Dodge, their BMW, or their Lexus. Honest journalism is hard to find in today's editorial free-for-all. Most illuminating is the high school's presentment of the Hobson's choice left to the board. Sue the village of Brookfield or do nothing at all. How clever of the board to not even trouble itself with the third choice available, which is resurfacing the existing tennis courts, beautifying the existing green space, which I hope would include replanting the decimated garden planted by the class of 2013, and revisiting the parking lot issue with the zoo and the county. By completely eliminating the third choice, the board takes on the heroic role of Odysseus in its steadfast quest for the parking lot expansion, ultimately triumphant in defeating the suitors who are opposed to modernization. The same suitors who would revert our school district to the Middle Ages and have our children walk or ride their bikes to school. How medieval is that? Unlike the rabble-rousers in Hollywood, I look forward to the day when board members drive into the new parking lot containing reserved spaces for their exclusive use in honor of and as a tribute to their accomplishments. Perhaps the board will further ingratiate itself with a monument inscribed with the names of the administrators and board members whose diligence, perseverance, and commitment to their high-minded principles made the modernized parking lot possible for all to use, including zoo patrons, semi-pro football teams, and drug dealers too. How fortunate are we that the powers that be have decided to take on the added responsibility of further burdening the not-so-well-heeled residents of Brookfield, who will eventually have to pay the attorney's fees, costs, and expenses for both sides of the litigation, and the board filed against the village of Brookfield. Mel Brooks was right when he said, "It's good to be king." You, the stewards of our money that apparently grows on trees, are to be honored for having the courage, the discipline, and the resolve to man the ramparts against the confused and unenlightened trustees of Brookfield for threatening the high school's sacred grounds that the board was chosen to defend, to protect, and to modernize as its infinite wisdom deems appropriate. I wish the board Godspeed in the battle for modernity against the evil forces of antiquity. More important, I encourage the board to dismiss its arrogant and mean-spirited lawsuit against the Village of Brookfield and get rid of the toxic turf and replace it with a healthier, student-friendly surface, maybe even grass. There's a novel idea. If you dismiss the lawsuit and get rid of the crumb rubber, undoubtedly the board will have a record to be proud of. If not, then I'm reminded of the immortal words of John Wayne, who said, "Life is tough. Life is tougher when you're stupid." Thank you.
Thank you. Under 15 minutes.
1439.
Okay, at this point, we're going to move on to